What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. It's been a week now since I last talked to you guys, but I said that I would do a UNC preview. I got swamped with work last week, so that never happened. But, maybe it's for the best because a lot of the things I was going to say probably ended up being wrong anyway, so that allowed me to save face. It's been a wild weekend. As I'm sure you're aware, and you don't want me to reiterate, Duke did suffer a loss to its rival North Carolina in Chapel Hill on Saturday night, and it has been quite the weekend for me. For those of you that are aware of my dynamic, that I covered Duke and grew up a Duke basketball fan my entire life, but attend the University of North Carolina, and I'm a senior, and it's just such a weird dynamic for me. It's always been such a weird dynamic for me. I cover both teams. I've written for the Daily Tar Heel. Of course, I do this. I run Duke Wisdom. And it's an odd dynamic being on campus and having so many friends that were going to the game, asking if I got tickets to the game. And quite frankly, I wasn't sure if I wanted tickets to in the student section to the game. I've done that before. I went my sophomore year. I got tickets to Duke Carolina football, and I went with the Duke jersey on in the student section. And you can imagine the belittling I faced. But I didn't think I had it in me to go to a top 10 Duke Carolina basketball game in the student section. I was going to have to just wear like a black shirt. So I and remain as partial as possible and just have zero enjoyment, zero anger. And I thought it's probably for the best to watch this in my living room and not be there. But the university helped me out, and I didn't get it, which I think is a little bit messed up. The way they changed ticketing at UNC for students, it used to be that at some point in your 4 years you were guaranteed a ticket. At some point you were guaranteed to get a Duke Carolina ticket. They changed it to where they give preferential treatment to the people who stack up what we call fever points. So they go to a bunch of sporting events and they get a certain number of points, to their student account or whatever. And the people who go to more events are more likely to get into these games. And then the second tier is then graduating seniors, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And so, to me, I'm not too pressed about it. I hope that all of you who didn't know that I will be a North Carolina graduate in May aren't deterred from listening to this podcast. I assure you, I do my hardest to be transparent. That's something that I've had the conversation with myself and others about. Is I want to be as objective as I possibly can in my role covering both teams. But I do want to be as transparent as possible to the fact that I started Duke Wisdom when I was a really young kid, very young kid when I started Duke Wisdom. I started Duke Wisdom in 2013. And so I've been at this for a while, and I was very young, grew up a Duke fan, grew up a massive Duke fan. But obviously my major and my career path took me to the University of North Carolina. And I think it's funny because I've been getting a lot of hate from Carolina fans. Seems like every Duke Carolina game, I always have one tweet that goes off. And this year it was quote tweeting the Armando Bacot saying the ACC runs through me. And I quote tweeted it and just pointed out that he in fact has won 0 ACC regular season or conference titles in his time at Carolina. He is now, with the win on Saturday, 5-5 against Duke in his career. In his 4 years, Carolina has missed the tournament twice, or what would have been twice, assuming, if the 2020 tournament had happened, North Carolina was out. He's missed the tournament twice and been an 8 seed twice. Made it out of the first round once. I simply just pointed these things out. I wasn't like Armando Bacot's a bum, but of course that blows up, and I've got my mentions are just full of Carolina fans saying, I am the oxymoron of wisdom. I should take that Duke Wisdom is not a fitting name and this and that. And they're like, trying to belittle my intelligence and being like, oh, they don't teach anything at Duke. And I'm just like, you guys would be really, really glad to know where I'm attending university right now. But I have such an interesting dynamic in this rivalry now that I didn't have a few years ago. but obviously I do now. And it's weird to see it from this point of view. And I wasn't able to be there in person, but I very well could see a Duke Carolina game in person, not in Cameron, but in the ACC tournament. I've in a previous episode, I've talked about my role with the North Carolina Sports Network, and I will be there in person covering the ACC tournament with the NC Sports Network. So stay on the lookout for that and go check out the North Carolina Sports Network on Twitter, Instagram. Go check out the website and all that. But I'll be in Washington, D.C. for that in March, and that's really exciting. So stay tuned for that. And I've talked about my role, but I think that's the most interesting thing I can kind of bring to this table. But I will talk about the fact that I felt somewhat optimistic about this game for Duke. It is the first time these two teams have met, both ranked in the top 10 since 2019. Certainly not the first time Duke has been ranked in the top 10 during this matchup, but it is the first time Carolina has been in 5 years. And, you know, the Tar Heels have been very good. When they suffered that loss to Georgia Tech earlier in the week, that was kind of when the tide turned for me in terms of how I thought this game would go. I thought if Carolina squeaked out a win against Georgia Tech, that I felt pretty confident from that point forward. I felt pretty confident that, you know, Duke would end up winning the game. If Carolina was coming in 10-0 in ACC play, I thought they were due, and I thought Duke was finally hitting its stride with a win against Clemson and probably its best game, or at least its second best game of the season against Virginia Tech. I thought Duke had a really good chance at winning this game. But when Georgia Tech, somehow a giant killer this season, their 3 conference wins are against Carolina, Duke, and Clemson, the 3 best teams. Well, I'd argue actually now the first, second, and fourth best teams in the ACC. Virginia is now the 3rd. I think Virginia is going to be at least one of Duke or Carolina, if not both of them. I'll get into that later and probably later podcast episodes, but I think it's absolutely ludicrous not to have Virginia in bracketology right now. They only have 5 losses. They're clearly a tournament level team. Joe Lenardi's crazy for only having 2 bids or 3 bids, if he's including Clemson in bracketology. Virginia is a tournament team now. I don't think that was the case a month and a half ago. I think it is certainly the case now. But anyway, I digress. I got away from what I was talking about. I think that Duke certainly had a good chance at taking this game if Carolina hadn't lost Georgia Tech. They still did have a good chance at winning this game, though. But Carolina played a spectacular game. It's hard to imagine UNC playing a better game than they played. And you got to think Baycott and RJ Davis have never really experienced beating Duke in front of a full Dean Dome. And then, you know, the students getting to leave the Dean Dome and rush Franklin Street immediately after a loss. That's not something Baycott and RJ Davis have ever seen. The only time in either of their careers before that day that Carolina had beat Duke at home was in 2021, and there was a limited capacity of people there, all socially distanced in the crowd, wearing masks. There was a rush of Franklin Street. It was much smaller. They were even told by the city not to do so. So much different circumstances around that. Also, they beat a Duke team that was bad. And this Duke team, clearly not bad, despite what a lot of people want to say on social media right now. This is not a bad Duke basketball team. They just lost over the weekend to the number 3 team in the country on the road in the best game Carolina has played in half a decade. Besides maybe the games they played literally against Duke in the Final Four and at Duke in 2022. I mean, if you take that like 7 or 8 game stretch that Carolina was on in March of 2022 and you forget about it, this is, and just talking about regular season especially, this is easily the best game North Carolina has put together in half a decade. I truly do believe that. Duke played a good enough game offensively to win. I mean, they scored 84 points. They more than played a good enough game here offensively to win this game. Defensively, they were lacking in a lot of ways. They were sloppy with the ball. There's no doubt about that. But I think John Shire really hit the nail on the head that what this game came down to was those 50-50 balls. There were so many instances in which the ball came loose and it was up for grabs, and Carolina ended up with it every single time. And it seemed like everything during the entire game went Carolina's way, except for that one call at the end of the game, which was a hook and hold on RJ Davis. If you're trying to call it anything on Kyle Filipowski, you've lost your mind. It certainly was not a foul on Filipowski. If calling it live, I wouldn't have called it a flagrant. But when you look back at it, technically by the rule, you can call that a flagrant. But, the fact that Duke really put themselves in a position to where they could have made a last-ditch effort to kind of win that game at the end is a very classic Duke thing to do in this rivalry, especially lately. Duke has been very good at stitching together double-digit comebacks in like the last 2 minutes of Duke-Carolina games. Carolina doesn't do that kind of thing. Usually when Carolina wins, you kind of figured Carolina was going to win for 40 minutes. That was really the case in this one. The only thing that was going to prevent that was one of those classic Duke comebacks. It didn't happen. They weren't able to pull it off. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but the turnovers were one of them. They couldn't get control of 50-50 balls. Clearly the defensive game plan. I want to talk about the defensive game plan that Duke had. I think John Shire's plan, and I think it was abundantly apparent that his plan was, let's take RJ Davis out of the basketball game entirely. Let's try our darndest to take RJ Davis out of the game. He's been blitzing people and teams. He's been the ACC Player of the Year to this point. I know that just a couple of episodes ago I said it was Filipowski. That has certainly changed. I think the tide is now RJ Davis, and there's still 10 games to go in the season, mind you. But the goal was take Davis out of the game. And for the majority of the game, Tyrese Proctor did a very good job. And especially in the first half, the officials were letting this game be a little more physical inside. And that probably was to the chagrin of many Duke fans because of the no free throws attempted at halftime and only 11 attempted on the game. It certainly didn't benefit Duke in the long run. But, in the first half, it allowed Tyrese Proctor to be a little more physical defending RJ Davis and largely took RJ Davis out of the game for a very good chunk of the game. He really didn't get, even close to his averages until the very end of the game when it was more or less out of reach. Duke was backpedaling and Davis got a few shots to go and ended the game with 17. But I would argue that this is one of RJ Davis's worst games he's played during the year, but he's had an incredible season.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network or DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
Duke did a good job of taking Davis out of the game. Defensively, I loved what they did with Cadeau. I almost feel bad for Elliot Cadeau. The way he would take those 3-point shots, and it even got down to the end of the game where the way he was taking his free throws was just with so little confidence. I mean, that guy has so little confidence in his shot right now. And shout out to Hubert Davis for taking him out of the game after he missed that one free throw toward the end. Because if he had kept him in the game, I'm 100% sure Shire's game plan was to foul Cadeau literally immediately on every inbound and make that young man put the game away. And if he couldn't, Duke would have had a good chance at winning it. But Davis pulled him. He acknowledged that was going to happen. But, I mean, he just couldn't shoot at all. Cadeau just really struggled with his confidence. And Duke singled that out, and they guarded him like he was Ben Simmons, which is kind of sad when you're a point guard of actual point guard height to be treated like Ben Simmons as a shooter. But that's, they can do it. And when you're treated like that as an offensive player, it gets into your head. So I think Duke did a very good job of nixing Carolina's backcourt. Duke won the backcourt battle, without a doubt. And that's coming from a place, and I'll get into the offensive standpoint for Duke, but that's coming from a place in which Tyrese Proctor almost disappeared from the game offensively. He had just 2 points on the game after averaging 18 points a game over the 3 games prior to Carolina. He just disappeared. Even with Proctor disappearing, Duke won the backcourt battle, and I don't think it's even particularly close. What Duke did not win was the front court battle. Armando Bacot had his best game against Duke in his career. And it was something somewhat predictable. This was a game that meant a lot to him that he wanted to get. And he goes for 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. Statistically speaking, it wasn't that much better of a game than Kyle Filipowski, who had 22 points and 5 rebounds. But efficiency-wise, Bacot was very, very efficient. He did a much better job of setting up his teammates and drawing attention than Filipowski. He made less mistakes than Filipowski. I'll get into this more. I think Kyle's taking a little bit too much heat for this loss. I think people are a little bit too mad at Filipowski. He's just about the only player ever that I can imagine, and I talk about this every week, but he's about the only player I can imagine who scores 22 against Carolina and gets so much of the heat for the loss and just gets smack talked. And I just let's ease up off Kyle a little bit. But they lost that front court battle, and a lot of it boils down to the fact that Harrison Ingram had the game of his life. And who would have guessed? Ingram's a very good player, and I think in a lot of games this season he's even been UNC's second best player. He's a former McDonald's All-American. He had 21 points. That's his best as a Tar Heel. 21 points and 13 rebounds for Harrison Ingram. And he just absolutely scorched Duke from three, which is no shock because he was wide open for so many of these hits. And a lot of them came off of offensive boards or 50-50 balls that Duke was a little late scrambling to get to. And because they were a little late scrambling to get to those looks, they couldn't defend Ingram efficiently on those threes. They weren't getting out on him in the way they should. But he's been a significantly better three-point shooter this season for North Carolina than he has been for Stanford. In the two previous seasons, he shot 31% on about 3.5 attempts a game. I mean, he shot the ball about 4.5 times a game, and he makes 41%. And that's very good. And he's a very good three-point shooter, a very underrated three-point shooter. But I think if you're Duke, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating that you did a very good job on RJ Davis. Bacot burnt you in a way that he shouldn't have, but ultimately Filipowski maybe isn't equipped to defend bigs like Armando Bacot. Certainly not in the same way that Derek Lively was last season. I think in a lot of ways, Derek Lively II made Armando Bacot look like Derek Lively III. And last season, I mean, Bacot is a brute big man. He uses force to impose his will in the interior. And when Derek Lively was defending him, he couldn't do that. He could push Lively in, but he just couldn't get the shot over him because Lively is just so long and athletic that he just sent everything back. And he made Bacot a non-factor for those two games in a lot of ways. But today, there was no Derek Lively. There was just Kyle Filipowski, or at times Ryan Young, and Bacot knew that he could have his way with that. And the thing about this Carolina team is if you decide to double Bacot, he's a pretty solid passer. And so if you decide to double him, you want to leave Cadeau open, because if you leave anyone else open, they're hitting that three. If it's Davis, if it's Ingram, if it's Cormac Ryan, you've just given up 3 points. And, I mean, Cadeau can drive as well, and he's such a good distributor that even when you leave him open, he's able adjust and go back over to Cadeau. Somebody else is going to be open. He'll find him. He's a great passer. This is a very dangerous UNC team. It's the best one, like I've mentioned, in half a decade. But it's frustrating that they got burnt in the way they did by Ingram in a very unanticipated way, because I think they took care of business in ways, but it's disheartening to see North Carolina score 93, because for most of this season, Duke had gone full length without allowing a single team to even meet its average, period, for any game. And then North Carolina goes and rattles off 93. I had a buddy of mine who texted me during the game, and he said, man, I don't mean to be mean, but this Duke team is slow. And I thought, well, at first I was like, this North Carolina team is fast. That's what you're seeing. They play a very fast-paced game, and that's a very classic North Carolina way of playing. But, Duke isn't slow per se, but compared to North Carolina, they are, and they really shouldn't be. They really shouldn't be because of how many guards they have. And I've talked about that. But despite that, it would have been very much to Duke's benefit if the game had been ugly. If it had been an ugly, sloppy, kind of slow, not quite Virginia brand basketball, but closer to Virginia than to the fast-paced, like NBA-style Indiana Pacers game that Carolina likes to play. Because last year there were two almost identical scores. It was like 62-57, 63-57. Those games weren't pretty, but that's how Duke wanted them to play. And so I would err to say if Duke wants that game to be more so in the 70s score-wise. And I think if it is in Durham in March, Duke's going to win. They need to keep Carolina from running. I mean, Duke turned the ball over a decent amount of times in this game, but the amount of points off turnovers was almost shot for shot identical with the amount of turnovers Duke had. It was almost like every turnover Duke had, Carolina turned it into a basket. And sometimes, and this is something you don't often see in college basketball, Duke would score and Carolina was turning a Duke bucket into a fast break in 4 or 5 seconds. As a Milwaukee Bucks fan, that's something that I've seen happen as the Bucks have gotten older this season, especially when they play the Pacers, who play the number one pace in basketball, that Milwaukee will score, and within 3 seconds, Indiana's laying the ball up on the other end. And Carolina plays a college basketball brand of that pace. And it's very difficult to see Duke have the turnovers that it had and it turned into the amount of fast break opportunities for North Carolina. Defensively, I think Duke fell short in a lot of ways. They needed to try their best to dictate the pace of the game. I know with the atmosphere, the level of team, it's much easier said than done. There's no doubt about that. But Duke fell short in a lot of ways defensively, but in a lot of ways, Carolina got its best game that it could have asked for out of Ingram. Best game it could have asked for out of Bacot. He was 10 of 13. I mean, come on. Cadeau didn't shoot very well, but he did a decent job as a distributor. RJ Davis had a fine game when it was all said and done. Certainly, Duke did a pretty good job on him, though, Proctor especially defensively. Cormac Ryan did okay, but really it came down to those to not being able to contain Carolina's front court. And I think in a lot of ways that boils down to how Duke's roster is structured. Al Filipowski, and we've been saying it all season long, he's not a true center. He's just not a true center. And so defensively, he struggles sometimes in these matchups. But I want to talk about Kyle because whether he's supposed to be a 5 or not, he is this team's 5, and they don't have any other option. People will point to Sean Stewart. Sean Stewart would not have done a better job than Filipowski in this game. Not yet. He's not ready for that level of play at this exact moment, not in my opinion, at least. Sidebar, I'm devastated that Sean Stewart's Hot Cocoa Night was postponed. Whenever it gets rescheduled to, I will be there. That sounds like a terrific time. Anyway, just so gas, man. Kville, Hot Cocoa, Sean Stewart with the little sweater on. Beautiful. Anyway, but Flip has been getting so much heat for this loss. He did shoot 1 of 6 from 3, but he's been shooting unrealistically well for a decent amount of ACC play from 3, and this one kind of brought him back to earth. Carolina did a great job defending the three-point line. Duke was 5 of 19. They did a very good job of limiting the percentage of McCain. I do think Roach should have shot more. I'll talk about that. Obviously, Proctor didn't attempt any. I mean, they were able to keep him away from attempting any. And so Filipowski ends up launching, tied for the most attempts on the team. He only shoots 1 of 6. He could have shot a lot better. He had open looks. Certainly he could have, but you can't bank on Filipowski shooting 40% from 3. You can't bank on that, man. He's typically not that level of a shooter. He was a little bit of a late bloomer in this game. He ends with 22. That wasn't the story for most of the game, but he ended with an all right game. He had zero assists, just 5 rebounds. Stands out. He needed to do a little more dirty work in the paint, getting more rebounds. That's very important when playing against Bacot and Ingram, who are both terrific rebounders. So I think but this is where I'm leading is, Bacot in that quote where he says that the ACC runs through him, he's talking about how it doesn't. Basically, he's implying how it doesn't run through Filipowski in the beginning of that quote. Not only is he saying that, but after Duke got that lead down to 8 at the end of the game, and that was their window of opportunity to potentially win the game. Bacot goes down. I every time down the court, I'm screaming at Flip. I'm like, just keep your hands up. Don't swipe down. Don't go low. Just stay lateral. And of course, he swipes at him. Bacot gets an and 1. He does the too little thing, then the whole bench does the too little thing. Everybody's saying Filipowski is too little. And I'm like, dude, you can't take that, man. You're a projected top 10 pick in this draft. You cannot take that. You can't. In that game in Cameron, if Filipowski's not flirting with a 30-piece double-double, we got a problem here, man. Something like that happens, you got to go give those dudes work next time you play them. You've got to show up. And I think we'll see what he's made of next time they play Carolina, because that's bulletin board material at its finest right there. But the whole time, I'm watching this game, I'm thinking, I wish Filipowski would throw some sort of dig, just cockily, shrug to the crowd or hit somebody, step on somebody. I don't know, man, because that's the classic Duke villainry. Christian Laettner made people hate him. He made people hate him. There was reason. Grayson Allen didn't want people to hate him in the same way that Laettner did, but they did because he was involved in physical altercations. And then there's, the cocky showmanship of J.J. Redick is why people hated him. People love to hate good white players at Duke. That is a simple fact. You cannot deny that. The fact that Kyle Filipowski has, for the most part, avoided that hate as Duke's best player for 2 consecutive seasons is insane. And somebody who was my colleague at the Daily Tar Heel, the sports editor at the DTH right now, her name's Shelby Swanson. She just wrote a column about how Filipowski is providing sort of a villain, that he had this physical player, whatever, that chipped some of Baycott's teeth. And I want to push back in a very, very sincere way on that take. I do not believe that Filipowski is a villain in this rivalry. He has done nothing to take that role on besides being Duke's best player. Teams play very physically with him. It was very apparent. Almost every play, almost every replay, you can see Baycott grabbing Filipowski's jersey and untucking it almost every single play down in the paint on both ends. Filipowski is on the receiving end of so many physical plays. I don't really want to hear it about him dishing it back out, because he's not doing it in a malicious or a cocky way. He is not the traditional Duke villain that we've seen in years past. And part of me, thinks maybe he needs to be. Maybe that's what this team needs. They need that kind of moxie. I don't know. I never wish the hate. That I know that's such a difficult role to play. Not everybody takes it in the way Christian Laettner does. It is such a difficult place to be in, and J.J. Redick has talked about how Maryland fans went at his sister and he had to change his phone number, dozens of times. And Grayson Allen has talked about the toll it took on his mental health. So I do not want. Well, I think part of it, you want and I've just said it, I'm going to contradict myself. You want kind of the moxie that comes with the Duke villain. I do not want to thrust the Duke villain label onto a player who has not done anything that warrants it. I don't believe that Grayson Allen should have been given that role either. Let me put that out there. That I think that it was unfair in a lot of ways to thrust that onto Grayson Allen, but I think it's very unfair to preemptively thrust that upon Kyle Filipowski. All he's done is be Duke's best player. Traditionally, when there's a guy like that, especially for 2 years running, you would imagine he would assume that role. I don't think he has. And I don't want to thrust that role upon him yet. So I don't know if anybody agrees with me or about any point I just made with Filipowski, but I hope you'll hear that out. And I know I contradicted myself a bit, but anyway, I'll get off my soapbox about that and kind of get back to the player by player. So I talked about him. I want to talk about Jared McCain because a lot of talk about Jared McCain, a lot of negative comments about that young man from opposing fan bases, and namely North Carolina fans this week. And I was really hoping that Jared McCain, even if Duke lost, which they did, that he would just have a really good game. And nobody would be able to say anything about that young man because he's such a high character guy, a hard-working kid, puts up 23 points, grabs 11 rebounds, and was easily Duke's best player in that game. And he talked about months ago how he was ready for this rivalry game. And, and I told people beforehand, I was just like, it's easy to say you want this matchup, but when you're a freshman, it's difficult to perform in this matchup. Jared McCain backed it up. Jared McCain stood on business. No doubt about that. And if you're a Carolina fan and you're still saying anything negative about that young man, I don't know what to tell you. I think you need to look in the mirror and reevaluate yourself as a person. There's no reason to, and you got to respect the game that he put out there. Duke lost that game, but it wasn't because of Jared McCain. He was Duke's best offensive player, and he was Duke's best defensive player, in my opinion. And he scrapped, although Tyrese Proctor has a claim defensively. But McCain played a terrific game. Just a terrific game. Speaking of players that played a terrific game, Jeremy Roach did very well. And I tweeted something like, Jeremy Roach plays against Carolina like a player who is still seeking vengeance for those 2 losses in 2022. And I think he is. I think it hurts and pains him to lose a game to North Carolina after that. I think he never wanted to again. And he had succeeded at it until this game. Certainly, I don't think he wants to end his career in Cameron Indoor if it is, in fact, his last game in March with a loss to North Carolina. I got to think that he's going to want to end on a win. He played a very good game. Jeremy Roach did very well. I wish he would have shot more threes because Carolina did a really good job of limiting looks off the catch for 3-pointers. But what Jeremy Roach does especially well is shoot 3-pointers off the dribble. And I think that is, of all the players Duke has, he's probably the best at it. And I think maybe he should have put up some more, put a little more team on his back, senior captain action from Roach. But very happy with Jeremy Roach's performance. Off the bench, Foster gave 4 points and fouled out, actually. 2 points from Ryan Young, and in 2 minutes, pretty inconsequential 0 from Sean Stewart. So the bench offensively wasn't providing a whole lot. And then there's the other 2 guys in the starting lineup. You end with 11 points, 2 blocks, 7 boards from Mark Mitchell. Certainly not a bad game, but honestly, it was a game in which you didn't notice it. I looked at the box at the end of the game, and I was like, he had 11? That seems high. And I think Mitchell could have been more high impact and played a bigger role in containing Harrison Ingram and Armando Bacot. I think that we can't single out Kyle in that regard, that Mark Mitchell is also in the front court. We've got to hold everybody accountable, but he certainly has been great in ACC play, but perhaps a little bit of a forgettable performance. But Tyrese Proctor is where offensively, I think the only real problem is that and not getting a whole lot of production from the bench. But Proctor had just 2 points. He shot 6 times. He only made 1. A lot of the times when he did anything, he didn't shoot any threes, which is very uncharacteristic for Proctor. He shot 6 2-point field goals, and a lot of the times when he attempted those, he was just dribbling into nothing, into a look that wasn't there, or he was picking up his dribble like 2 strides too early. And I don't know if that's a nerves thing because you seldom see nerves from Proctor, but just miscalculations that are atypical of his game, that he would go into Bacot into nothing and just get his shot sent or put up a really bad shot. And just a very uncharacteristic game from Proctor in that regard. But they needed him to show up. And I mean, honestly, all he had to do was score his average, 11 points per game. And that game's tied. There it is, 93-93. It's hard to say you need everybody's best or average every game, but in this one, that was the case because defensively they didn't meet the fold and Carolina played a terrific game. I don't know if this just maybe was a game they were never going to win. I don't know. It certainly is a game they could have won, though, and I think that is a welcome. That's an encouraging sign for Duke right now because this is a game that North Carolina played. They played so well in, and Duke made some mistakes, but ultimately was in a position for a decent amount of the game where Carolina was up 10 or so, but it never really felt out of reach. for Duke. And I think if they clean up some things and Carolina plays a little more down to earth, that Duke should win the next matchup. And I'm going on record to say I'm pretty confident. I think Duke will win it, Cameron. I 100% think that. But it's interesting. And I think there's another side to this where Duke needed to win that game to keep an ACC regular season title in reach. Honestly, they actually would have assumed first in conference. They would have been tied in number of losses with Carolina, but held the head to head, and they would have ended up with a being in line for the 1 seed in the ACC tournament with a win on Saturday. They didn't get it, and now they've got 3 losses. Carolina has 1, and I'm pretty confident, and I was pretty confident anyway, that Carolina's going to win the regular season. That's almost a foregone conclusion this year, and that is what it is. But Duke should strive to get that 2 seed, or maybe even a 3 seed, and it'll be all right. And go win the ACC tournament. I'll be there. I'd love to see it. Although I will be very much I very much am not rooting for anyone while I'm there, because I am in a nonpartisan journalistic environment. But I want to discourage Duke fans from being too pessimistic about this. This is a number 3 team in the country Duke just lost to. Duke is not a bad team. They're still very much a 3 or a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, with room to improve that depending on how they play the rest of the slate. I think that Duke is turning a corner that they had already improved. And I feel very similarly to this game as I did to the Virginia game. Duke got blown out by Miami last season, and then the very next game, they got a game just stolen from them at Virginia by officiating at the last second. And from that point forward, Duke didn't lose again until they lost to Tennessee in the second round of the NCAA tournament. They rattled off 10 wins before they lost that game. And to me, this feels, I'm not saying they're not going to lose again until the NCAA tournament or anything, but this feels a lot like that in a way that it's like they were already turning a corner, which Duke similarly seemed to already be turning a corner a little bit before that Miami game. And then they had just a heartbreaker, and Duke seemed to be turning a corner right before this Carolina loss. And maybe this is the game that'll light a fire. I guess we'll see. We'll see how they respond against Notre Dame on Wednesday. That one should be interesting. Duke has a stretch here where a 3-game stretch where they really shouldn't lose. Wake Forest is a very good team, but at home, Duke really should not lose that game. It is my opinion that I think Duke will lose about twice more the rest of the season. I also believe Carolina will lose twice more. I think the Heels will win the regular season 25-6, and Duke will win 24-7. Certainly, you can't complain about that. Duke will be in a position to play very well in the ACC tournament. And again, for those who didn't know, I hope you're not. You don't shun me away for my double agent role with both of these teams. I'm not really a double agent. I'm very upfront now about it. I debated for years about, wanting to talk about, how long I've been doing this. And when I went to Carolina and I got back into journalism, I knew that, especially sports writing, I knew that it was going to be something that comes up. It's always the first thing that comes up to people, that it's like a what kind of thing. Like even at my dentist office, like I'll show up wearing a Duke sweatshirt, and people are like, don't you go to Carolina? And it's sort of like, yeah, it's one of the first things that comes up. It's the first thing that comes up in job interviews and stuff for me. It's an interesting position that I'm in, and I think that I want to own that, because how many people are in my position that are sports writers? A lot of my contemporaries who are journalists who go to Carolina or sports writers are very, very much bias in a Carolina direction. They very much they are a student of the University of North Carolina, and I think they do a very fine job of providing objective coverage of games and events. But there's no doubt about it that they have a bias for the University of North Carolina. How many times do you get a student writer at UNC who does not have a bias for North Carolina, nor have they ever at any point in their life? So I thought I bring an interesting dynamic to that, and I do my best to provide coverage in an unbiased way. for Duke and for North Carolina and for any team in the Atlantic Coast Conference. When I'm in a journalistic setting, that is my goal. And sometimes my tweets might land a little off, a little off base, a little bit too dukey for maybe a journalist's liking, but with Duke wisdom, that is. And it is what it is. I try my best just to, when I'm refuting points that might be a little more favorable to Duke, that all I do is just point out numbers. I'm not saying anything false. I'm not saying anything opinionated. All I'm doing is presenting some numbers. So anyway, with that being said, thank you guys. I know that this losing to Carolina, it's not a fun time being a Duke fan, but thanks so much for listening anyway. I know that listenership always drops after losses, but thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate you guys. And it's been just so awesome getting to do this podcast and feeling the love from everybody and the community with Duke Wisdom. And that's what I love about this, and getting to work with and write with and produce content with Duke fans is a privilege. And I'd love to meet some of you guys. If there's some sort of event I'll be at, and you guys know I'm going to be there, let me know, man. I'd love to meet you guys. Some of you, I think that would be amazing. And, let me know that I'm not just talking into this microphone, that what I'm saying is falling onto real ears. But Notre Dame's up next on Wednesday. The Carolina talk is done for a little bit, at least until the next matchup comes back around. And there might even be a third matchup this year. Who knows? But thanks so much for listening, as always. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Follow on Instagram, Twitter, that kind of thing. And I'll talk to you guys on Thursday.